Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
I'm Rod Bryant along with Jerry Gordon on Beyond the Matrix. I really appreciate you guys spending time with us each week, discovering what the latest news and updates are in the great land of Israel. We also have with us a very special guest we've had on before, Mr. Dan Diker. He's talking to us right now from his home in the late evening or early evening, and we're excited about having some questions for him. Jerry, why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Dan, this was not the usual Yom HaZikaron commemoration this evening in Israel. Why don't you give us a feeling about what occurred and how different it was?
Well, Jerry, Rod, you folks are very right. This was probably the most unusual, unprecedented Memorial Day, known in Hebrew as Yom HaZikaron, in memorializing the women and men in the state of Israel, Jews and non-Jews all together, who sacrificed their lives in order to ensure the survival of the country from the War of Independence in 1948 to the struggle against radical Islamic and Arab terrorism in 2020. And for the first time, the traditional ceremony at the Western Wall in the historic ancient city of Jerusalem was only populated by the honor guard of the IDF, the chief of staff, Aviv Kochavi, who gave his traditional message of inspiration, and the president of the state of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, all of whom wore anti-COVID-19 masks, operating masks, as they delivered their words of inspiration, and certainly sitting in the audience. It was a Hitchcockian experience, I must say, but at the same time, it was inspiring because the entire 9 million strong people of the state of Israel were on the roofs, were on their porches, were next to their apartments with Israeli flags, waving them and singing Hatikva at the same time. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, all loyal citizens of the state of Israel, showing their appreciation for those men and women who sacrificed their lives so that the small and the one and only Jewish state could continue to survive and thrive.
For the sake of the listener, you did say it was a Memorial Day, but many people, for example, in the United States, I don't particularly because I'm a veteran, but many people spend it grilling hot dogs and burgers and drinking beer on the patio. Is this much more of a somber thing in Israel, or is it about the same type of atmosphere?
It's a very different atmosphere than it is traditionally in the United States. I will say, having grown up in the United States, I've become much more aware and sensitive as an Israeli over the years when I watch Memorial Day reporting in the United States with veterans and their families who do go to the various sites where veterans are memorialized and honored and buried. But for most Americans, Rod, and it was our family included growing up in the United States, it was much more a chance for a barbecue and a social gathering of family and friends in a rather celebratory fashion. In Israel, it's very different. In Israel, the Memorial Day affects every single citizen of Israel. Every single citizen has lost a family member or a friend or a neighbor or a colleague in either to terrorism or to the wars of Israel from 48, 56, 67, 73, the 82 war in Lebanon, and then all of the anti-terror operations. So everyone is affected directly by this most solemn of days. But unlike the United States, 24 hours later, which we will see Independence Day emerge, and the heaviness, the clouds of mourning are lifted to the sunshine of celebration of a new morning and a new day. And it will be the 72nd year of Israel's reconstitution in 1948, after 2,000 years of exile. The Jewish people, nation state of the Jewish people, is strong. and let's say the back-to-back experience of the darkness and the sadness of Memorial Day that then leads into the sunshine of Independence Day makes the entire experience all that much stronger.
Wow. Jerry?
I just prior to this interview, I had watched a program directly from Israel, sponsored by the American Zionist movement, but it was focused on the lone soldiers. Those are people from the diaspora who volunteered to go to Israel to support it and defend it. And I thought that presentation was pretty significant for me personally, knowing others who have done that. But even in the small Jewish community of Pensacola, we now have 2 young women who are volunteering to exactly perform the same function. And that means a lot to us here, and it means a connection directly with Israel in terms of its success and its defense.
Well, can you folks hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
You're fine. Go ahead.
You know, Jerry, Rod, the place that lone soldiers, men and women both have in Israel, is a place of great honor, distinction, respect, and admiration by all citizens of Israel, because these young men and women have come alone to the state of Israel, which, as you folks know, is about the size of the state of Maryland, perhaps a teeny bit larger, towards the size of the state of New Jersey, surrounded by hostile states. And today, some of those states have become more amenable to Israel and even allies of Israel. And I would suggest that Egypt today is far more amenable, almost an ally in certain sense of the word, in fighting radical Islamic terror in the Sinai, as well as the attempts of ISIS and Al Qaeda to topple President al-Sisi. President al-Sisi has proven himself as a friend, I would say cautiously, but a friend of Israel. And King Abdullah II has shown his amenability to Israel, even though that's a far more complex situation because of the terrible demographic risks and instability that Jordan is facing. But nonetheless, the point here is that the lone soldiers in Israel have made a tremendous sacrifice to defend the one and only Jewish state without parents, without family. But all of Israel is their family. And I think one example of that is when several lone soldiers were killed in the 2014 war in Gaza. One lone soldier from California who was known by very few people, ended up with 35,000 people coming to his funeral. He was killed when his half-track was blown up by Hamas terrorists, and 35,000 people came to mourn him. That's just one example of the type of appreciation that people have here for lone soldiers from wherever they come, whether it's Pensacola, Florida, or Los Angeles, California.
If you could take just a moment, and we have many listeners that are not Jewish, that's never been to Israel, yet they still listen to the station, and do a comparison. Since you were raised in the United States and you're now in Israel, describe to the listener the marked difference in the way people relate to each other in Israel versus the United States. I mean, the United States is a great country, don't get me wrong, but there is an atmosphere of family in Israel that's palatable. Could you explain that?
Well, it is palatable. As a matter of fact, a Palestinian friend of mine and I tonight on the phone, this is how it goes in Israel, Rod. My Palestinian friend named Khalid called me up to wish me a meaningful Memorial Day. He is an Arab Israeli, or an Israeli Arab, as we say, and I love him as much as I love anyone in my own family. A fellow citizen, he's a patriot. He pays a high price to be a patriot.
Absolutely.
Because the Palestinian Authority has threatened him. The PLO has threatened him. Hamas has threatened him. So he walks on. He really walks between the raindrops, as you say, in very has to dance a very difficult dance. But that's just one example of an intimate moment that happens between Israelis. And I would say Israelis it's like family in your face, an in your face family, meaning that people don't hold on to the type of mannered niceties that we do in the United States. There is something to be said about manners and niceties. I think Israelis have become more mannered since over the last 20 years, since many of us have been able to fly to places like Pensacola and experience
Southern hospitality, right?
the manners and hospitality and decency. The American people is probably the most decent people, I think, in the world. And I think some of that comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Mm-hmm. Some of it comes from just the decency. The American people are really a phenomenally decent people. And in Israel, I think that sometimes we become an unpleasant people one to the other, but a people that's full of love, and a people whose doors you could knock on and you can just come in for a meal without having to make a reservation or wear a dinner jacket. Just show up and join the conversation. And I will say that we have wonderful relationships with many Christian communities in the United States, not only Jewish communities, mm-hmm. but we, especially here in Efrat, the ancient city of Efrat, which is between Bethlehem and Hebron, we welcome large Christian groups with the sanction of our chief rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, who himself made immigration, Aliyah to Israel, about 37 years ago. He has been an inspiration to me. And I can say we both have had to adapt to the family in your face culture of Israel, but in the end, I think both of us succeeded to raise families here.
Yeah, when we come back, I want to pick up right where we were at. This is very inspiring, and I hope really fills in the blank for a lot of people. We're going to go to a break right now, guys, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Speaking of Shlomo Riskin, his sister was a member of my congregation back in Fairfield, Connecticut. So we used
Judy?
Yes. And
no, not Judy. His other sister,
Myra. Sister. Yes,
Myra.
And periodically, when he was coming to New York or the States, he would show up and give us the kind of drosh that you folks are used to having over there.
Yeah, he only knows how to do that.
Yeah, he does. I mean, this is a guy who's not only a rabbi, but he's got, a PhD from NYU, as I recall.
Yes, he does. In women's studies, I think.
Yes, of all things.
Hey, Jerry, how come you look younger than you did when I met you in New Mexico about 15 years ago?
Because I am now very slim down to about 172 pounds.
Oh, is that what it is? You slim down? Is that what happened?
Oh, yeah. I lost close to 50 pounds between the point you saw me in 2007 and currently. And I keep up daily exercise, and particularly at my age, walking about 3 or 4 miles a day.
Wow, isn't that something?
Inside the captivity of my condo.
Sorry, guys. I had to take my boots off.
Good. Dan, when we come back, one of the things we probably will segue to is to talk about what the impact is like of the coronavirus pandemic on you all in Israel, but also some of the things that Israel is doing differently than even here in the United States that may have some assistance in a sort of breakthrough on testing and vaccines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll share with you guys on this program what I'm going to write about as to how Israel successfully killed Corona and why.
That's probably the theme of the program, my friend. Yeah.
Okay, stand by. By the way, you guys that are watching on YouTube, appreciate you guys leaving great messages. You're putting comments below the video. We really appreciate it. Makes us feel like it's worth the time to spend to record the show. So This airs obviously every Wednesday around noon, so you guys will be able to pick it up each week here as well as on the podcast. Stand by just a second. I got so into that conversation that I almost forgot the time. I was just schmoozing
We
away.
hope the audience forget the time.
Yeah, exactly. I was
Push
just
the button.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is working out.
This is working out. Okay, in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Back from the break. Thank you so much. Pull up a chair and grab a hot cup of tea. We're going to pick back up where we were. And we're talking about the marked contrast or difference between Israelis, and Americans. And one of the things that you pointed out, which is so true, and you really only are going to see that if you go visit Israel, and that is everybody's sort of in your face family. So you can't think that they're being rude to you. That's just how they would talk to one of their family members.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in fact, an Israeli that you haven't seen in some time, and you see him or her for the first time in a while, they could come up to you and say, "Hey, how you doing? You got fat." and then say, "Let's go and grab some coffee and have lunch."
Yeah.
But Dan, you just gave me a wonderful compliment saying when you had first met me 15 years ago, actually longer at this point, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, how come I look younger? And I said, very simply, I've lost weight.
You did, and you do look younger. I didn't know what it was, but
see, Dan, you used that American sentiment of kindness to describe his weight loss. So that's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, you could have said, "You're looking old and wrinkly. What have you done? Lost weight." See, you didn't do that. Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Dan, Israel's in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic as we are here in the U.S., but what is Israel doing differently that may kill it?
Well, Jerry, this morning on the morning talk shows, one of the best-known talk show hosts said, "We've slayed the dragon. We've killed Corona." And his co-host said, "Not so fast, Kobe. Not so fast. It's only the first attack." Well, I think we've killed Corona on its first major attack, and we've flattened that curve, as the expression goes. We, for the first time in 5 or 6 weeks, we have about 50% of those infected overall have already recovered. We have only about 90 people in the entire country on breathing machines, on ventilators, and only about we've lost, every soul lost is a soul too much, too many that's been lost, but we've lost only about 200 people, as fatalities in this pandemic, which, as it goes in the Western world, is fairly reasonable when you look at just the numbers. So the curves. The curves are flattening. Very few people, I think there were 60 or 70 people between yesterday and today were infected, which is a rate of infection that Israel can live with. And subsequently, Israel just today has started to open up the markets, the cosmetic salons, the hair salons, the markets on the street. The indoor malls are still closed. And it's a real, I would say, not a crapshoot, but it's definitely an experiment to see whether the public behavior will be disciplined enough to maintain that 6-foot distance between people. The people have to wear masks and are penalized $60 on the spot by any city clerk or city enforcement officer if they don't wear masks, and many people wear gloves. People are going back to work. I went to the office today. We only had 5 or 6 people in a 2,000 square foot building, so there's plenty of distance between folks. But I think we're beginning to see the reopening of Israel, and I think one of our senior members of our government, Naftali Bennett, who is a friend of mine and a wonderful guy. He's the defense minister. He's an American Israeli as well, born to American parents in Haifa, and he became defense minister some 8 months ago and has done an outstanding job in managing this crisis and bringing the IDF into the management loop. He and Prime Minister Netanyahu have had differences of opinion about how to manage this crisis from a public health standpoint and an enforcement standpoint. And Bennett has successfully brought in the Home Front Command to support the police and other civil agencies in protecting our what we call our golden age population, which are people over the age of 65, and particularly those over 70 and into their 80s and 90s who are the most vulnerable to this pandemic. And I think that Israel's come out of it because the country was born in a culture of survival and managing disaster. Everything from losing 1% of its population in the 1948 War for Independence to surviving terrorism throughout the last 72 years. The country is disciplined enough to listen to military commanders, to listen to the government when it comes to protecting the public. So in the same way that 1/3 of Israel's public was in bomb shelters for 50 days during the 2014 war against Hamas in Gaza, when Hamas was sending thousands of rockets from the south, or in the earlier 2006 war when Hezbollah, at the instruction of Tehran, of the mullahs in Iran, was firing thousands of rockets into northern and central Israel. The Israeli public knows how to protect itself and knows actually how to, the American expression is suck it up and go down to bomb shelters, and they know how to stay in their homes if they have to isolate during this pandemic. So that type of culture of discipline under fire, I think, is in large part what contributed to our success. In addition to which, with this, I'll end my response here. The Israeli government is a centralized government. It's not like the United States, where you have federal government, you have state governments, you have local governments, you have mayors, and sometimes you have tensions between those different decision makers, as we're seeing in the United States these days over the varying policies over the 50 states in terms of social distancing, enclosures, and isolation. You do not have that in Israel, so that there is in this much more centralized management system, if you will, it's much easier to get things done. And also, Israel's Mossad has done a tremendous job in sourcing ventilators and other life-saving equipment and medicines when Israel was short of it. So we have a very flexible system at the top in terms of our decision makers, our security forces. They know how to work together. The public is disciplined, follows orders, and that's how we got over this hump and killed the corona enemy in its first major attack.
It's a big testament to the tenacity of the Israeli people, all the citizens. I do know here, and I'm sure that you've seen that the government, that is the way it's set up, there is so much friction that has happened with, one person doing a mandate or one state doing a mandate and another state not doing it. There's this constant sort of battle going back and forth. And then you have people who are very so independently minded. They don't want anybody to tell them what to do. That's a blessing. As a matter of fact, a dear friend of mine in Sfat told me, he said, America's the only culture to where they can do something like this, and they would rather risk their life than to give up some semblance of liberty. And it's kind of an odd thing. I mean, it's a completely different thing than you would find in any country, I think.
Well, it's certainly, look, the United States and part of the greatness of the United States as probably the most important human example of human liberty in a political sense in the world. In the United States, formed by the extraordinary Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution, guarantee freedom and liberty and rights to the individuals. And that was clearly, the founding ethos of the United States was to separate from an oppressive British taxation system and system of mercantile politics and colonial politics. And so that is why individual liberty and freedom in the United States is so important. And I very much identify and understand people that want to bear arms and protect their families under the Constitution, right to bear arms and the right to be free from a sort of oppressive centralized dictates, which in this particular situation, which the coronavirus is threatening lives, it sometimes calls for the sacrifice of certain personal liberties for the good of saving lives of individuals and the community. Israel was not founded with a constitution protecting individual rights, even though we have basic laws that protect individual rights. But remember, in the same way that the nation of Israel was founded at Mount Sinai 3,700 years ago in a group of 600,000 people, we received the Torah as 600,000 people, and we today continue as 9 million people. But we're very much a culture hopefully of unity, but a culture of group, of families and clans and tribes and ethnicities that really define itself as groups as opposed to as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very well said. You brought up Sinai, reminded me that they said, yes, we will do, and then they heard. And so
that's right. Yes.
They made the commitment. Right. They made the commitment right up the front before even hearing. And that, once again, that is sort of the culture of Israelis and what makes it so unique and special. Jared, we only have a couple of minutes left in this segment. Do you have something you want to bring up?
Oh, yeah. Just speaking about unity in Israel, you've got a brand new government there. Is that going to last?
Well, we have a government in the making. It hasn't been approved by the Knesset. It's in the process of being approved, but it most probably will be approved. I think one of the outstanding and remarkable features of this government is that it essentially defied the promise of the opposition that was led by a coalition of 3 former chiefs of staff and 4 factions. And the key faction, which is called the Resilience faction, the Resilience Party, led by former Chief of Staff Benny Gantz, broke away. And I salute General Gantz for breaking away, because the crisis in Israel was so acute between the pandemic and the fact that for the last year and a quarter, there has not been a government, because three former elections resulted in a stalemate between the Likud, the more Republican Likud, if you will, and the more centrist blue and white. And Benny Gantz stood up and said, I'm going to put country first. I'm going to put country first, and I'm going to put my own personal political agenda second. And that's how we got to this, what they call national emergency government as opposed to national unity government. And what's extraordinary about it is that the Labor Party, which swore never to sit in the Netanyahu government, is just now going to sit.
Dan, we're going to have to go to a break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Will do.
Excellent. Okay. Stand by. We'll come back.
Oh, is Dan there?
Yes.
Yeah, 1 second. Your video stopped. Hold on a second. Microphone is unmuted. Okay. Speak.
Now it's unmuted, yes.
What happened to his picture?
Welcome
there I am.
on Israel News Talk Radio.
Back from the break. Thank you so much.
Okay, so you rendered that, my friend?
Yes, I'm doing it now.
Okay.
Well, I'm not hearing you guys very well.
Really?
Can you hear?
Oh, wait a second. No, I'm good. We're good.
Okay. When we come back, you want to wrap up about who is what in this potential unity government? You mentioned your
what job?
Naftali.
How it's structured?
Yeah.
I think you're covering up the microphone with your hand.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes, a lot better. Can you hear us?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Stand by. Very, 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 very good. Should we wear our masks? That's funny. We should have done it when we came on. For people watching on YouTube, the irony of yeah, it's funny.
All right.
Okay. Here we go. 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
I don't know if you know this or not, but you can watch Beyond the Matrix on YouTube. We live stream it on YouTube at the same time. You go to Netiv, Netiv online, one word, Netiv online, and click on the playlist that says BTM or Beyond the Matrix, and you'll be able to watch it on here live as well. Dan, do you want to pick up where you left off, or do you remember where you left off?
I think he did.
I remember. I think I remember where I left off. Even though watching Jerry Gordon put on his hospital mask made me forget everything. Where we are in the Israeli National Emergency Government is that Prime Minister Netanyahu, even though he's under indictment on 3 charges, he's according to law able to continue governing, and he has earned another year and a half as prime minister under the current coalition agreement with the Blue and White Party. And then there will be a rotation where former Chief of Staff Gantz becomes the prime minister in an automatic rotation. And both men are considered alternate prime ministers. That's how they're. It's almost like a president and an executive vice president at the same time. Both being paid the same, both having the same terms of honor and authority, and there are various veto powers that Netanyahu has that Gantz agreed to. One of them is this issue of applying Israeli law to settlements in the West Bank. Is that something you want to talk about now, or you want to wait a little bit and chat about that a little bit later?
I think you want to talk about that because the sovereignty issue has been raised by Secretary of State Pompeo recently. And
well, yes, it has. Yes, it has.
It has.
Yes,
and despite that, there's criticism by the usual characters in the EU and the UN. So why don't
I think there's a major disconnect that has been going on for decades regarding rights and responsibilities in the area of Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. At the very minimum, these territories are disputed. They are not Palestinian territories. There has been a Soviet-style program of propaganda that has taken place over the last 50 years, certainly since Israel came into these territories against its will in the 1967 war, opposite Jordan, when Jordan and opposite Egypt and Syria. But Israel came into the Judea and Samaria, its ancient, the heart of its ancient homeland, when the Jordanians bombed Jerusalem and forcing Israel to fight back and go into the West Bank, which the hills of the West Bank, as you know, are almost 3,500 feet above sea level. So therefore, they have a topographical advantage. You can bomb the entire Israeli western coast, and that's why Israel needed to have that security belt, because it had no strategic depth. But from a legal standpoint, Israel has all the rights in the world in the West Bank because of the birthday that we had yesterday,
Right,
Jerry and Rod. You know what birthday that was? 100 years of San Remo, the
Correct.
San Remo Conference. Do you remember that?
Yep. Well, why don't you tell the people what
tell
the significance of San Remo is?
Well, one of the big disconnects is that most people have been fed the deception that Israel's rights to sovereignty were only guaranteed by the United Nations in 1947, when the proposal at the UN of 2 states for 2 peoples, a Jewish state and an Arab state, that was the language used, was proposed by the UN, that had been frustrated by the constant Arab attacks against the Jewish community in what was then British Mandate Palestine. But that's incorrect. The right to Jewish sovereignty in the ancient Jewish homeland was actually, in the modern period, revived and actually redacted into international law beginning in 1917 in the Balfour Declaration, when the British custodians of the British Mandate fulfilled their responsibility to be the mandate in Palestine, and ultimately in the San Remo Conference, which was an international conference in San Remo, Italy. The major powers, Britain led major powers in the world to underscore the right of the Jews to reestablish their homeland in the state of Israel. And then in 1922, the principal powers of the League of Nations, which is the legal predecessor to the United Nations that we have today, they voted unanimously to affirm Israel's right, and here is the language they used, to reconstitute their country in Palestine, British Mandate Palestine, not Palestine that the Palestinians claim was their country. There was no country here called Palestine. It was merely a geographical region that was subject to mandate law, and part of that mandate was to guarantee by international legal decision the rights of the Jewish people to have a homeland. And they did not differentiate between the West, what was then geographically the West Bank, and between that and Tel Aviv. So in the western part of Palestine, the major powers in the international community agreed that Israel had all the rights in the world. So here we are today in 2020. All we are doing is reasserting the very rights that we never had lost internationally, beginning in 1920. But people might be surprised to hear me say that now, because they say, well, wait a minute, isn't this occupied Palestinian territory? That is only a Soviet propaganda deception, has nothing to do with the rights of Jews, and our neighbors have rights as well. So that's why we have to negotiate. We have to negotiate a disposition. But what is happening now is that the United States government has recognized Israel's basic rights where it lives in the communities in the West Bank, and they would agree presumptively that Israel would have the right to apply its law to its existing communities in the West Bank and strategically in the Jordan Valley, which is critical for Israel's survival. For those of you that visited the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley, you know what I mean by the topographical advantage of having control over the Jordan Rift Valley and the Judean Samarian hilltops.
Dan, the adoption of sovereignty means the application of Israel's basic law to those areas now. I have cousins, for example, in Me'ala Adamim. I'm sure they would appreciate not having Kogat, the military administration, involved with decisions for there, and you as well in Efrat. So why not do this? And also, what does it do for what you've been working on, which is normalization with those Arab populations as well?
Well, first of all, it has to be said, Jerry, that there is an element of controversy if Israel were to take a unilateral decision to apply Israeli law to communities and to apply Israeli law in totality to the Jordan Valley, which doesn't mean annexation per se, but it means applying Israeli law. And that is that we are still governed diplomatically by the Oslo process, which was a diplomatic process begun in 1993. It failed following the establishment of Oslo II, the interim accords in September 1995. The idea was to end the conflict between the Palestinian Liberation Organization as a former terrorist organization and the State of Israel. Their claim that they were the sole representative of the Palestinian people as of 1974, with the failure of the Arab countries to destroy Israel following the 73 war. But in fact, the Oslo Accords over the last 25 years have failed, and they have fallen victim to Palestinian terror and I think deception. As somebody who studies these accords and studied Arafat a little bit, and has studied his successor Mahmoud Abbas, and now Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh, there is very strong evidence to suggest that when they speak in Arabic, they make it clear that they never had any intention of sacrificing any part of what they call historic Palestine, which is geographically what comprises all of Israel today, plus the disputed West Bank, and what they consider, and they include Gaza, even though Israel got out of Gaza lock, stock, and barrel back in 2005. But there is a moment of controversy here, because if we're governed by the Oslo process, even though the other side has broken and violated the Oslo process numerous times, specifically in 2011, when they proclaimed unilateral declaration of independence, if you remember, there diplomatically can be an argument by the international community that Israel can't take unilateral action, as Oslo II Accords asserts for both sides.
But you're telling me that even though the PA is has violated that and said that they weren't going to do it, does that still hold Israel in that contract?
Well, you can argue that it does. You can argue that it does because Israel never took any official or formal diplomatic position to say that they were opting out of the contract the way President Trump did, for example, in the JCPOA, when they saw that the Iranian regime repeatedly violated the terms of the JCPOA, and Trump said, we're leaving it, we're out. Israel did not take that move, so it could be argued that the agreement still governs both sides.
So, if with that being said, that means that pretty much I can assume the deal of the century is dead in the water. It's not going to happen.
The deal of the century, let's put it this way. The deal of the century, in President Trump's inimitable fashion of understatement, is actually a very good deal for both sides. It's a good deal for the Palestinians. I mean, if I were a Palestinian, I would grab it. Bear in mind, Rod, as you probably know very well, and Jerry knows, the Palestinians have turned down 6 offers for statehood.
Right.
They've offered 6 times. So there's every reason to believe they'll turn it down a 7th time.
You know, Dan, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I hope it's not the last time that we can have you on. Really very informative, good information. We wish you well and a good night's rest for you and your family, and happy Independence Day that's coming up. You've been listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. We'll see you at the same place this week here on INTR.
God bless from Jerusalem.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Good stuff.
Wonderful. How many are you? How's your audience? Do you know what your audience is? Do you know how many people
the audience is, we just started putting it on YouTube. And so within about last week's video, within 2 hours, it was rating in the top 10 of my videos on the channel. And we had 246 people watch it within 2 or 3 hours.
Great.
So I haven't went back to look, but yes, we're really getting a good deal on the video content. It's just the way it is. It's the media, the way it's working now. Video is the way to do it, and we're in the Corona season, so everybody's videos are not looking the best, but they're functional. So, but this works.
But it's great to see Dan in the flesh, and
absolutely. I didn't know he was that handsome.
Yes, yes.
Very kind. You're too kind. Where do I send the contribution?
Yeah. It's an nonprofit. Okay. Well, we really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll have you on back real soon. Sorry for.
I'm always happy to come on the show. I think this is a great way of doing it. We should do it on Zoom. I think it's much more intimate and
it's a lot better, and it flows better.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah. And for the audience, they kind of get in between what's going on in the discussions, in between the break. They don't get that with the radio station. So,
yeah, that's right.
And so what we're going to do now is go ahead and say bye to the watching audience. Thank you for watching Beyond the Matrix here on YouTube. Shalom.
Well, I forgot to do this.
Oh, yeah.